You're watching Tea with Katriel, a Hard Vibes Media production. Tea with Katriel, Wednesdays at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Hello everyone, it's your girl Katriel and you're watching Tea with Katriel. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Today, we have a very interesting topic that we're going to be talking about with a very special guest of mine. She's been on the show before and she really taught us something very important. But today we're going to hear from her how to handle this particular topic, and we're going to be talking about abuse. Oh my gosh. I can't wait to get on this. Let's welcome Mrs. Victoria Okoukoni, who is also a pastor. Hello, Evangelist Victoria.
Hello, Katriel. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for
Good.
having me.
I know. It's so good to see. How are you doing this COVID-19 season?
By the grace of God, God is keeping us. That's all
We're
I can say. Grace.
That's good. So, can you let the audience know who you are? I introduced you, but I want them to hear from you specifically.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Good to see everybody. I am thankful to everyone that's going to be watching, and I am thankful to Katriel for having me first and foremost. Thank you for giving me this platform to speak with you. My name is Victoria Okoukoni. First of all, I am a registered nurse. I've been a nurse for about since 2008. Since 2008, I've been practicing nursing in different areas. And I found the area that most interests me is mental health. And I think we're going to be speaking in some aspect about mental health today. I love to know people. I love to know how people think. I like to know about people's behaviors and how the behaviors affect their outcomes. And in some aspect, we're going to be speaking about mental health today. I am also the wife of a pastor. Our church is Rain in Zion International Ministries. We are located in Kitchener. I am also a mom of two little ones. And I love to teach the Word of God. I love to teach the Word of God, especially to women. I like to use it to empower women, talking about issues such as, what we're going to be talking about today, and just to enable us to live a more effective life. And that's a little about me.
Wow, thank you so much. So, as y'all know, we're talking about abuse today. Before we get to the tea, Victoria, what are you having for tea? Are you having virtual tea with me today?
I am. I'm having my chai spice, my all-time favorite.
Yay! That is so good. Why do you like chai spice?
I think because this is what we grew up like having back home, and so the taste has just always been with me. So everyone, yeah.
That's amazing. I just found this new tea. I went to the store a few weeks ago and I'm like, I need to start eating healthy and drinking healthy stuff. And I saw it's called like blueberry ginseng. It's supposed to give you like clarity, relax you. I don't feel no effect, but I'm still drinking it. Hey, cheers.
Maybe after a couple of cups, you may feel it.
Maybe, because sometimes as a mom, I need something to relax me, after all the hard days work. Oh my gosh.
Moving around, yes, you need it.
So now back to the tea of the day.
All right.
Talking about abuse. Drum roll.
Yeah.
Okay. Pastor Victoria. I know she doesn't want me to call her pastor, but I'm still going to.
Victoria, it's okay.
So, can you tell us what your idea of abuse is? Because not a lot of people really understand in depth what abuse is. So, can you tell us from your understanding what you think abuse is?
Abuse itself, the word abuse is very broad. We know that there are many different kinds of abuse. I wrote down a dictionary definition just, to simplify things for us. And the dictionary says abuse is using something for a bad purpose. So anytime you have something that maybe another person wants and you misuse it, you take that power and misuse it against somebody else, then it's abuse. When we think about financial abuse and you're using money, when we think about domestic violence, maybe you're using love and you're using your stature, you're using, whatever it is that appeals to your partner, you're using it against them. We see abuse at work where our managers use their power as, formal leaders against their employees. So it's very broad, but basically misusing whatever it is that you have against somebody else. You're using it for the wrong purpose.
Right. Wow. Okay. So now that you've mentioned what abuse is, I would like for us to dive a little bit more into it. And today, because we have Pastor Victoria on, we're going to be talking, also applying the spiritual aspect of it. The other guest speaker we have is going to go more clinical. Today is going to be a little bit of both, so we can understand, those of us that are Christians and even non-Christians can understand specific areas on how to handle things. So now, you've talked about abuse. Can you tell me who a victim is? I mean, is there a label on how you can tell a victim?
A victim is anybody on the receiving end. Anybody on the receiving end, and you don't necessarily have to be labeled by somebody else as a victim, as long as you feel like you're being misused, as long as you feel like somebody's exercising their power against you in the wrong way, then you're a victim. And of course, we don't like to use the word victim, right? Because then that makes us admit that we're being abused, or makes us we get put into a certain category.
Mm.
But yeah, the person on the receiving end, I will say.
Okay, so you've spoken about what it is to be a victim. Like you said, there's really no label. There's really no like specific person. So now I want to ask another question is like what should we do for ourselves and for others in terms of abuse? Like how should we handle this as individuals?
Handling it in terms of if you know someone or you yourself, because it all depends on the type of abuse. I believe um, there's no one case fits all. So if we zoom in on one area, then we can talk about different strategies, or zoom in on three areas, we can talk about those different strategies.
Okay, so let's say if you're yourself, find yourself that you're becoming a victim. How do you look out for yourself, right? Either in a relationship. Let's put it that way.
Okay, so that's in terms of domestic violence. If you find
Yes.
yourself in that situation, if I, because there's so many different factors. Before I, address the question directly, there are certain things that make us at risk for
Mhm.
abuse, especially as women. I just want to point out, starting with the risk factors for women, and they're similar. They're similar in terms of what I found, and this is information I found on the World Health Organization, and it talks about low self-esteem. If you're someone
Mm.
who has low self-esteem, it puts you at risk for, domestic violence. If you're a low-income earner, that also puts you at risk, because, and we see the level of dependency. That's where the abuse could stem from.
Right.
Low academic achievement, or low education achievement, that also puts us at risk again, because of the level of literacy. We're depending more on the other person, and they're
Mhm.
able to misuse that power against
Mm.
us. Um,
Mhm.
the World Health Organization found that and these are global stats, they found that younger people are more at risk for being abused in a relationship. Early pregnancy also puts us at risk, for abuse. If you are in a relationship, or if you yourself are misusing alcohol, if you're misusing substances, that puts you at risk. Mental illness. Mental illness is a big one,
Mm.
because that is more likely to make you a victim, really,
Yes.
than anything else. And mental health is very broad. It's not just people who have a clinical diagnosis. It's, again, it comes from self-esteem, it comes from anxiety. Maybe you're an anxious person, always apprehensive or worrying all the time, but you're not quite diagnosed. You don't have a diagnosis yet. That puts you at risk. And again, the person that you're in a relationship with, similarly, if they have low education, low self-esteem. So if you find yourself in that type of a relationship, that increases the risk of abuse. And what we find in our community, in the Black community, if I may call it that, is we have stereotypes, that traditions and certain ideas that we hold about gender roles.
Mm.
And we find that men who have that strong view of who men are, or
Mhm.
what women should be, what their roles should be,
Excuse me.
those men are more likely to be abusers, because they're more likely to use that power
Right.
against a woman. And so if you're already in that situation, you're already in that relationship, you look out for things like belittling. When we talk
Mhm.
about physical abuse, there comes emotional abuse as well. They usually occur one with the other. We see controlling behavior, somebody withholding finances from you, somebody restricting how many friends you could have, where you could go. So those are things that you could look out for if you see those things as a pattern happening in your relationship. And if you find yourself in fear of the other person, then you really need to assess where you are. You need to assess, the type of relationship that you're in, and depending on whether you have children or not. There's so many resources that are available, especially, speaking in Ontario, we have the 211 number where you can phone and you could get access to different resources.
Ministries, Prayer, Teaching, and Deliverance Ministry invites you to the Solution Center, where Master Jesus meets all your needs. Sunday services: first service 10:30 a.m., second service 1:30 p.m., Bible study Wednesday 6:30 p.m. Nights of Supernatural Encounter, first and third Friday of every month 8:30 p.m. Address: 1444 King Street East, Kitchener, on N2G2 and 7. Telephone: 647-783-4802, 647-995-3085. Toll-free prayer line: 226-646-7424. You can reach us on our website at www.reesministries.org. Email raininzioninternational@yahoo.com. Rain in Zion, where Master Jesus meets all your needs.
But even before you can get there, if you have friends that you can reach out to, it's good to have a network of support. Somebody you can talk things out with. It's good to have constructive friends. People that are willing to tell you the truth, and it's also good to have people that are resourceful in our lives. If you were somebody who didn't achieve as high education, that means you're not as resourceful. And I'm not saying that to be offensive, but it's more difficult for you to navigate the system. And so if you can reach out to a friend that can navigate the system for you, you can find coping strategies in that way. And of course, we have the church, and the church plays a big role. This is a big conversation. I don't really want to get into it now, but you can ask me about it. But church should be a place that people come to get help, because they attend, a person that attends church attends at least two services in a week, 2 out of 7. Let's say they go to church twice a week out of 7 days. So they should be able to get that support that they need from their pastor, from their pastor's wife, from their ministers.
That's so interesting that you actually brought up the topic of church, because that was a question that I was going to ask you about, how the church should handle such an issue, especially with church religion and the stereotypes that you mentioned, the gender roles. I've had people who have messaged inbox or like even just come out to let me know their stories of how they were being treated in church and how their issues were not being kept private. And can you talk a little bit more about how the church community should handle this area of abuse, especially in terms of confidentiality and in terms of like counseling? What advice would you give to the community, the church community?
I think, as a church, first and foremost, we need to acknowledge that this is an issue, right? We need to acknowledge this is an issue. And I can speak to the perspective of our church communities where, maybe perhaps where we grew up, abuse was just a way of life, right? That's how our mom was treated. And we see that that's a risk factor for abuse. If you grew up in a household where you watched your mother being abused, you're more likely to abuse her. And if you were a woman who grew up in that kind of household, you're more likely to kind of brush that off. I can give you an example of my life when I got married. A person that I respect said to me before the wedding, and said, your husband may get upset and hit you 1 or 2 times, but it's a mistake. Don't call the police. So this is how the abuse is normalized. This is normal. That's just how things should be. And I think that's trickled into the church, and it should be. One thing I always say as a rule of thumb is that you and I may be from different countries, we may be from different continents, we may be from different traditions, but when we come together in the body of Christ, we become a different person. We become a different citizen, and we adhere to different rules. We hold different values, not the values of our parents or grandparents, and that should be the rule of thumb, is that it shouldn't be okay just have the conversation. We need to first of all open our eyes to realize that this is happening and it's not normal. And if we're looking for people to flourish, we're looking for the souls of the people to flourish. If we think about women who are being abused, how effective can they be as mothers? How effective can they be as sisters? How effective can they be as a member of the body of Christ? That alone should lead us to say, you know what, this is a problem that we need to address, and not just sweep it under the rug, and not just, victimize the person, not blame the person. We tend to blame. We tend to tell women, if you do this, maybe he won't do that. If you respect, if you submit, if you do this, and we put all the responsibility on the woman. But we need to get the man and the woman together. We need to get the man, the woman, and the children together, or whatever the party may be that is experiencing that abuse. And we need to talk about it. And even not so much isolating the person, but if we make that as part of our daily conversation on the pulpit, as a pastor, if you put a day aside talking about family relationships, talking about healthy relationships, how to flourish in relationships, then it sends that message to everybody in the community that, we're concerned about this. We care about how you interact as your family. And so, couples, especially women, will feel more comfortable, because I think first and foremost, women are not comfortable going to their pastor because they know that maybe pastor will just say, we'll pray about it, or we'll fast about it, right? As opposed to giving practical tools. So I think first and foremost, we need to start talking about it on the pulpit. We need to talk about the importance of good relationships. And that opens the door for people to come forth and say, you know what, we're not doing well. And how can we cope? And really having, if a church of Christ, and we need to assess ourselves again as a church, whom we're serving. If we're serving Christ, then we're not gossiping, right? We're not gossiping, because that is not beneficial to anyone. We need to look at whom we're trying to benefit. And so if we're gossiping about people's problems, then we are encouraging them to live with their problems. We're encouraging them, to die with their problems. I found that on the World Health Organizations, that women who have been murdered, 38% of them have been murdered by their partner, but either their husband, their boyfriend, or somebody they were intimately involved with. How it's mind blowing. It's mind blowing. 38% is huge. And so we don't want it to get to that point. And those are just the numbers that are documented. Can you imagine where we come from, where there's no documentation? There's
Happens daily.
Yes. Imagine the number of women who have been pushed to the point of they have to now fight for themselves. Maybe they have now killed their partner, and now they're in jail, right? And now they're in jail serving a life sentence, or even with a mental illness, with just struggling. So we need to tackle these things even before they become a problem, and we can do that in the church, because people frequent. That is the area, aside from work, people frequent the church a lot more.
Right. And I think you've really touched on a lot of things that could be different topics. Like we could go on and on about it, especially with the piece about education. I think the community of the church needs to focus also on educating appropriately on
Yes.
issues like this. And also when you talk about like stereotypes, labeling, when someone comes to you with their problems, how do you handle it? Like you did mention about not talking about the issues with everybody, which I find most times a lot of, no offense to anybody, a lot of leaders, pastors, deacons, or people who do counseling in the church, quote unquote, majority of them are not trained enough to understand the immense impact of how good confidentiality can be, keeping a private matter confidence and not spewing it out there. And also because of that thing where you spoke about blaming also could lead to shaming. A lot of women, especially in the kind of culture that you and I are from, a lot of times the victims get shamed and blamed for what's going on. They're the victims, and they're the ones that are being abused by the community. So it's like on top of abuse, there's another abuse, injury on top of,
Exactly.
So now it's like, how do we get the community, not just the church, the community as a whole that we're in the society, in Canada, in Africa, how do we come together to break down these stereotypes, to change the narrative of how abuse is seen. and
Mhm.
and when I'm talking about changing the narrative, I'm also talking about children too, because there are a lot of kids who are victims of abuse, whether it be physical or sexual, especially sexual abuse, and they're being abused by people that are close to them, people that their parents trust, either
Right.
through babysitting. So
Mhm.
how do we get to start now, you know, like creating this idea where people begin to see the light that, hey, this is a problem.
Yeah, we talk about it. Again, we have to talk. It has to start with a conversation. The example I can use is the Me Too movement. Look at the Me Too movement. Look at the culture of sexual abuse that was happening since what was it, the 70s, the 80s, and now, well, the 60s probably, as far as we can remember, to the 2000s. Look how long that went on. But it changed once women started having the conversation. It's time
Hmm.
for women to have the conversation. It's time for women to rise up. And again, as I was looking at the World Health Organization, they said that to reduce abuse, we have to develop advocacy groups and have empowerment counseling. So it all starts with, it's okay to talk about it. We talked about shame. There's so much shame associated with abuse that we
Hmm.
don't talk about it. And on one end we have shame. On the other end we have, we're in communities where it's normal. So it's like it's not even something to be spoken of because
Yes.
that's not the way things are. But we need to say it for what it is. We need to define it for what it is. There's so many. I love that there's so many organizations online where you could find the information about different communities. But really, to answer your question, I think it starts with It starts with conversation from women, and it's also unity among women to speak up. Because if you speak up against against your situation, if you speak up about your beliefs, then you're empowering other women. Then they can come together. It would be like the Me Too movement, and all of a sudden, you know, these people, these perpetrators, who are the people, doing the abusing, we are now holding them accountable. We're now putting them in
Right.
that position, telling them
Right.
that it's not okay. And when you speak about children, again, conversations in our homes. Growing up, we didn't have a lot of conversations with our parents. You're not allowed to ask your parents questions. That's something that we need to teach young people to, because many of our peers, many of our sisters back home are having their children young, and they themselves are not educated. And so how can they give what they don't have? So we do it at home and we do it in schools to talk about what's okay, what's not okay, and to just encourage the kids to just go higher in education, because then that empowers them. That takes care, sometimes, not always, but it takes care of the self-esteem problem where you're not relying on somebody else. Because once you're dependent on somebody else, then that again puts you more at risk for abuse. So having a conversation starting at home, in our communities, in our church, on bigger platforms, and just talking against it. And especially in the church, I know that there's a church I attended some time ago, and the pastor was speaking about abuse, and he talked about, in terms of the Western society, he said that this society empowers women where they're offered housing, empowers them in that they can leave their husbands because they're offered housing and they're offered money, so they have no reason to need their husbands. And my thoughts, of course I didn't express this, but what I was thinking is, the church is not holding the men accountable, so the government is holding them accountable. The
Thank
government
you.
is telling them that it's okay for you to get out of a dangerous situation. We'll give you a place to start. And what's wrong with that? If you feel so strongly about it, hold your men accountable,
Thank you.
especially in the church, so that the government doesn't have to intervene.
Join us as we continue the conversation next week on Tea with Katriel. Tea with Katriel, Wednesdays at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.